I saw the article just today from last Friday's paper that you were going to be there.
Oh, good. So. Oh, I'm so glad then. Yeah, that's great. I'm glad you were able to make it with your wife's rehearsal schedule.
She said she got to.
Oh, did she? Oh, okay. I remember meeting her. Yeah, Nancy and I did a joint presentation. Uh-huh. Yeah. Oh, good. Well, tell her I said hello. Yeah. Thanks, Watts.
Hello, everybody. Can you hear me all right? We're going to get started now. Good evening and welcome. My name is Janice Cavender. I'm with UAF Summer Sessions and Lifelong Learning. Welcome to the Discover Alaska lecture series. And it's going. This event. Oh, I'm sorry. We have a special guest. Michelle, would you like to say a few words?
Janice Cavender is amazing. You know, everybody, she's our student. Can you have somebody that capable as a student in your office? You're so lucky, very lucky. She's got really good prepared remarks. But what I want to say is hello to all the people I know and all the people I don't know. Thank you for coming. This couldn't happen without the Geophysical Institute. Geophysical Institute, Bob McQuaid, if you've not met him, is the new director. We're doing 47 events this summer, and every night we've had cooperation from some entity that's helped put it on. And the Geophysical Institute were the ones that actually took responsibility for the programming. But we had help from University of Alaska Press, Joan Braddock. We were missing a few slots, and I said, what books do you have coming up? And so tonight is a result of really collaboration between the Geophysical Institute, University of Alaska Press, and summer sessions. And are you going to give a plug about Friday night? Okay. Yes, ma'am. This is Major Cavender. Okay, I'm going to turn this back to you. Thank you.
At this time, I'd like you to silence your cell phones. Admin tips, if you need the restroom, it's down the hallway towards the exit sign to the left. As Michelle mentioned, this Friday we're hosting Political Junkie out of the Wood Center Ballroom at 7 p.m. If you're interested in tickets, I'll be outside after the lecture, and you can see me about that. We also have a listserv for all the rest of our free events for the summer, for the rest of the summer. You can get weekly email updates just by signing down your email, and we'll get it to you every week. Tonight, we're very honored to have Miss Marybeth Holleman joining us. Miss Holleman was raised in the Appalachian Mountains of North Carolina and transplanted to Alaska's Chugach Mountains just after college. She's written several books and published essays, articles, and poems in periodicals such as Orion, North American Review, Christian Science Monitor, Sierra, and Alaska Quarterly Review, as well as anthologies including The Future of Nature, Solo, The Seacoast Reader, and American Nature Writing, and for NPR. She's taught creative writing and women's study at the University of Alaska Anchorage, and writes for nonprofits on environmental issues from polar bears to oil spills. Tonight, we will focus on her latest creation, a tribute to Gordon Haber's lifetime dedication to activism, and it's entitled Among Wolves, Gordon Haber's Insights into Alaska's Most Misunderstood Animal. Please join me in welcoming Marybeth Holleman.
Thanks, Janice. I appreciate everyone that was involved in inviting me to be part of this lecture series. It's really wonderful to be in Fairbanks again. I was telling a friend that the last couple of times I've been in Fairbanks was either in January or February. So this is really nice. And I appreciate this beautiful weather. So I'm here tonight to talk about this book, Among Wolves, and to share some of Dr. Gordon Haber's images with you. All of the images that I'm going to show you were taken by Dr. Haber, except the ones of him. This first image is of the Tokai wolf family group, otherwise known as the East Fork family group. And the Tokais were in the park, a strong and healthy, intact family group, when Gordon Haber first came to the park as a seasonal park ranger in 1966. They were also in the park, a strong and healthy, intact family group, when his research plane crashed into Denali's mountains and he perished in October, nearly 5 years ago, 5 years ago this October. So this family group spanned his entire career with wolves in Alaska. I'm really honored to be here and speak about his work. As Janice said, I came from North Carolina, and the year that I moved from North Carolina to Alaska, they were reintroducing the red wolf, which had become extinct in the wild, reintroducing it to the Alligator River National Wildlife Refuge in North Carolina. And I moved from that state to a state where we were still killing wolves, shooting them from the air. And that contrast has stuck with me all these years. So in my second year in Alaska, I went to hear Dr. Haber speak at the University of Alaska Anchorage. And I was thunderstruck, not just by his knowledge of wolves, but also by his passion for wolves. And he retained that passion his entire career, which is, I think, really something. So I'm going to give you a taste of what's in the book. And I think Janice might have mentioned there'll be some for sale afterwards. I'll be giving a presentation. Then we'll have a little time for Q&A, and then I will be available to sign books if you wish to purchase them today. The primary chapters of Among Wolves are by Gordon Haber. I got permission from his family and went through all of his research materials, his boxes full of write in the rain pads, his journals, and put together these primary chapters about wolves. And then also, in order to give an idea of his life as a field scientist, I interviewed friends and colleagues that had known him over the years, and some of their stories are interspersed in these chapters. As well, I included some of those little field notes that were in the Write in the Rain pads, and I also included, in his last year of life, he got on Twitter and he was tweeting, and so I included some of the tweets that he wrote that last year. When Gordon Haber was in high school, he was asked to write an essay about what he wanted to do with his life, and he wrote, "I am decided on one factor, this being that I intend to live the major portion of my life either in or near the outdoors." Now, he was raised in Detroit, so it wasn't a given that he would do that. But I think, as you'll see, he did exactly that. And in fact, few scientists spend as much time actually directly observing their research subjects as Dr. Haber did. And the other thing that's unusual about him is that he remained an independent scientist all of his years. The first couple seasons he was a seasonal park ranger, but after that he wasn't ever working for an institution or an organization of one kind or another. He was independent and simply got research grants from various groups. So he went on to study up to 18 different groups of wolves, and his study area included two of Alaska's grandest areas, Denali National Park and Preserve, and the Yukon-Charles Rivers National Preserve. It also included some state land, including the 40-mile region. This is a photo of Gordon Haber taken in 1969 by his friend Johnny Johnson. In the summer, as in this photo, he backpacked and hiked in. He located where the wolves were denning, and he set up camp within an appropriate distance from the den site and set up a blind and observed them that way throughout the summer. In winter, as you saw in the previous photo, he snowshoed or skied into the park. In the early years, he simply had to look for wolf tracks and try to locate them that way. Then later, once the Park Service started radio collaring wolves, he got those radio frequencies and had a pilot, and they would fly in winter and locate the wolves from the air. So a lot of these photos were taken from the air during those winter flights. This is a photograph of the Tokai wolf family group taken, and you can see Denali in the background here. He actually observed, he said the wolves use their entire territory, and he actually observed them up to 17,000 feet on the flanks of Denali itself. I had the opportunity to talk to park biologist Tom Meyer when he was still with us. And he said that he really admired Gordon Haber for the tough and grueling work that Haber did in the field. But interviewing his friends and colleagues, I think that What was even more tough for him was enduring the field of Alaska politics during his tenure here. Joe Bennett, who was on the board of game in the early 2000s, said that Gordon Haber was a thorn in the side of the state when it came to things like predator control issues, the Denali buffer issue. He went to all the board of game meetings and presented his findings and his testimony. But in general, his findings were ignored, his testimony was ignored, and he continued to see what happened to these wolves that he had dedicated his life to studying, that they were trapped and shot and families were disintegrated. So one of my driving questions in deciding to put this book together was, what sustained him for 43 years, continuing to do this work in the face of being ignored and having his findings not be applied to wolf management and seeing the results of that. And I concluded that what sustained him was what he actually observed and experienced when he was out there among the wolves. That's when he was truly taken with continuing his research. He wrote that wolves enliven the northern mountains, forests, and tundra like no other creatures, helping to enrich our own stay on the planet. This is the Savage River family group, and they're playing a game of tag. This photo was taken in 1974. I'm going to read one of the excerpts from Troy Dunn, who was his pilot for 10 years up until August 2009, just a couple months before he died. Troy Dunn flew with him a lot, got to know him pretty well, and this is just one of his stories of their time together. When it came to wolves, Gordon was like a kid. It didn't matter what the wolves were doing. Even if they were just lying around, lounging on a hot day, he was always excited to see them, and we did see some pretty amazing things. Once we saw a group of wolves coming up one side of a mountain and a different family group coming up the other side. They hadn't seen each other yet, and Gordon said to me, "Oh, geez, we can't leave. We just got to stay here." Well, there are only so many hours you can stay airborne. I configured our Cessna 180 specifically for Gordon's work, so we could stay airborne for 8 hours. But there's still a finite amount of fuel, so when the propeller is turning, it's like a football game with the clock ticking. "Okay," I told him. "All I ask is that if we're going to spend the time here, don't ask me if we can go out to McGrath, too." "Okay," he said, "just one more turn." So many times he'd say, "Just one more turn," again and again, sometimes literally 20 times. He had such a difficult time pulling himself away from those wolves. I have to admit I had a hard time leaving as well, but we always had so many more family groups to observe. One time we watched wolves trying to cross a section of open water when it was 35 below. Now, none of the wolves wanted to jump in that water at that temperature, so they were going up and down the stream. Then one found a tree fall across the water and howled to the other wolves. They all came running and all crossed over the fallen tree. It was problem solving, working together, using the tree as a bridge. Gordon just never lost his sense of wonder. He was always curious about why things are the way they are, not just wolves, but whales, old trees, forest fires, everything. He'd see some lenticular clouds over Denali and say, "That's really neat, why don't we take a shot of that?" One thing that really got his goat was naming something after a person. He said no natural feature should ever be named for a person. He had a name for anything that didn't have a name based on his experiences there. Ass Kicker Canyon, Mud Slump Valley. Once I said we should name a particular pass Haber Pass. He said, "No way, I call it Misery Pass." And then he explained how he'd spent a few wet months there back in the late 1960s. My last flight with him was one of the standouts. That's when we saw the towflat pups crossing the Sanctuary River, and I'm going to show you that photo sequence in just a few minutes. It was the yearling with the bad front leg. She had been limping all winter long, who went in after those pups, especially the one bobbing downstream. To see that wolf go in that water and act like a block, using her body as a barricade so the pup could get footing on the bank, to see those wolves working together and coaxing the pups across that water for the first time in their lives, it was amazing. Gordon never tired of these things. When the pups were crossing the stream, he was excited and wanted to keep them in sight, so he kept saying, "Turn, turn, don't lose them." "Gordon," I said, "I can only fly this aircraft within the laws of physics." "Oh, okay," he said, "just do the best you can." "No, Gordon," I said, "I'm going to do the worst." "What do you mean?" he said. He didn't get sarcasm, at least not when he was watching wolves. This is the Tokai alpha pair. The Savage River family group and the Tokai family group were the two family groups that Gordon studied for most of his 16 or 17 years. And the Toklats, or East Fork, were the same family group that Adolf Murie studied in the 1920s and were the subject of his book, The Wolves of Mount McKinley. So this family group then was a continuous lineage from the 1920s on throughout Gordon Haber's career. And this makes them, along with the community of chimpanzees studied by Jane Goodall, the world's oldest known, longest studied large mammal social group in the wild. And this, as you can imagine, gives them inestimable scientific value. Is this thing doing okay? Okay, I hear a little bit of whining every now and then. This is from a sequence in the book, and this is the last part of the sequence. This is the Toklat family group waking up after a winter's nap before they set out again. It's been about 20 minutes since they first started waking up, and they start with a couple of wolves howling, and then a couple more howl, and then some of them start playing a little bit. But still, after 20 minutes, there's one wolf still asleep. To condense Dr. Haber's research, of course, is difficult, but I think that the most important take-home message is that when it comes to wolves, it's not about the numbers, but it's about the family group. The functional characteristic of wolves is that family group, not an individual wolf. I'm going to read what he said about that in an interview in Alaska Magazine in 1991. "The wolf just isn't one animal. It usually can't survive for long alone. It is 10 or 20 animals, typically an extended family, all acting as one in order to survive. Most biologists still take a superficial, numbers-based view of what constitutes a healthy wolf population. They say that you can harvest 30 or 40% of a wolf population annually, and it will rebuild to the same level every year. The problem is that wolves have complex societies. It takes a long time, at least several generations, for a family group to reach its societal cruising speed." These are wolves crossing this is how they usually travel in winter in single file. So Dr. Haber found that wolf family groups can develop certain traditions of cooperatively rearing pups and cooperatively hunting, but these take generations to develop. And he found that human hunting affects wolf populations and family structures differently. That is, it's not how many wolves you kill, but which wolves you kill. Natural losses are regulated, as you would expect, by changes in the environment, the prey populations, the weather, that kind of thing, the snow levels. And these more often take the younger, less experienced wolves. Sometimes because these younger wolves will simply disperse from the family group to new areas of their own volition. However, trapping and shooting usually often takes the alpha wolves, the older, more experienced wolves. And this has long-term reverberating effects on the whole group, which often ends up in even more wolves dying. This is a pair of Toklat pups. Dr. Haber became so convinced of the importance of the family group to what it means to be a wolf that, and he also was aware of the connotation of our language, that at some point in his career he stopped using the word pack and started using the word group or family group to refer to a group of wolves. And there is a section in this book where he explains why he chose to do that. But simply what he said is that the term pack has a connotation of like an unruly gang of hoodlums, sort of chaotic and each fending for themselves. Whereas what he found with wolves was that it's a very highly structured, socially integrated, orchestrated group, family group. Who are all related. This is another Tokai alpha pair. There's a whole chapter in the book on wolf pairs and mating. He said that wolves are generally monogamous and that their pair bonds are so strong, he wrote, that their bonds can easily rival or exceed the strength of typical human marital bonds. He also noted that the way this pair is traveling together is very common for the mated pairs to travel together year-round, not just during mating season. In his early years, he actually crawled around in wolf dens, uninhabited ones, of course, this is from 1966, 1967. It's one of the Tokai's home sites, and he mapped the den sites. So what he found is that wolf dens are not just one or two holes in the grounds, but are very complex areas, and they can encompass up to 50 acres. They often have a water source nearby, so you can see Gravel River Bar. This one's along the river. They're often on a high promontory, and this one's up on a bluff. They have several entrances and exits from the main chambers where the pups are usually born and reared. But then there are all kinds of other little entrances and cavities for the wolves to spend time in. There's usually a grassy area where the pups play, and then there's usually another rest area, which is off the map here, which is further away from where the pups are, where the adults can go and rest away from the rambunctious pups. He also noted that a couple of the den sites that have been used for probably hundreds of years by wolves in Denali also have some archaeological evidence that human hunters used to use those sites as well. Same reason, near water, high up, can see all around, similar features. This is a yearling, and she has 4 pups, 2 of them climbing around her neck and 2 more nearby. And she's pup sitting. Gordon, there's a whole chapter on rearing pups, and he said that wolves it takes about 25% of their lifespan for a wolf to become a full adult. And that prolonged dependency on adults, he said, is a hallmark of an advanced society. So to raise these pups takes a lot of effort, and the entire family group is involved in raising that litter of pups, not just the alpha male and female. There are babysitters. All the wolves go out, usually typically every night, and hunt and bring back food to those pups. And they're all involved in teaching the pups things like how to cross a river or how to hunt. He said that he describes 4 phases that pups go through in learning how to hunt. They start out being scared of everything, even a stick that moves a little bit or a leaf that falls, and then it continues on to where they are not afraid of anything, and they continue to chase caribou or moose long after the adult wolves have given up and figured it's not going to happen. So it's interesting to see these phases they go through, and it takes a couple years for them to become fully functioning members of the family group when it comes to things like hunting. Okay, this is the series that Troy Dunn referred to earlier. So this is the Tokai family group. This is some members of them. You have the alpha female, collared, a 2-year-old female, and a yearling female who was also doing some pup sitting earlier that summer. This is taken in August. This was one of the last flights that Troy took with, sure, go ahead and turn off the lights, that Troy took with Dr. Haber. And you have 3 pups here. This is one of their first forays away from the den site. They're moving them to another site for the summer. And so they're curious about everything, including the reflection in the water. Now they're crossing a braided river for the first time. And you live in interior Alaska, you're familiar with these broad braided rivers and all the channels of water. And here they've crossed one of the first channels of water, not very broad or deep. But still, even as the pups cross, the yearling has turned around to watch to make sure they get across. Now, because they're circling in a plane, his photos tend to change orientation. Just keep that in mind. The adults have crossed this larger braid of the river. It's deeper and broader. They've crossed fine, but the pups are hesitating. So what happens is the yearling sees this and turns around, and does some playful pouncing and intense focused gazing at the pups to try to encourage them to cross. The black pup starts to cross, but halfway out he freezes, and so the yearling goes out into the stream, and again she's doing some playful pouncing and splashing the water to encourage him. She even gets up and puts her mouth around the nape of his neck and steadies him from the current with her paw on the downstream current, but he still ends up turning back and not crossing. So finally, one of those brown pups decides to cross, but because she crosses a little further downstream and with the current, she ends up coming across to this cut bank, which is a little steep for these young pups. And so the yearling races down and is pulling up the brown pup here up that bank. Meanwhile, the black pup is headed for the same problem. So she's got the brown pup coming up, and she sees what's happening to him, and she turns and races down here. And her eyes, see how intently she's focused on this pup. Now, this is one of the times when Gordon's saying, don't lose him, and Troy's saying, we gotta, turn the plane around. And so Gordon sees this, but he doesn't get the photo that happens next. What happens next is that the yearling runs downstream of the pup and gets in the water, and the pup comes across into this little eddy that she's created and crawls up her back and then up the bank and crosses the river that way. So now here they all are together again on the opposite bank of the river, having, for the first time in their lives, crossed a major river. And you can see the exuberance in the way that they're moving here. And this is the yearling. They're paying special attention to her because she's helped them across. But even the 2-year-old has an extra bounce in her step now that they're all together again. Okay, I need the lights again. Sorry I have to do this with the lights, but I need to be able to see to read. Okay, this is a pair of toe clats at play. There's a whole chapter on the daily lives of wolves. And Gordon recorded that wolves play on average about every 30 minutes. And just about anything can spark an outbreak of play. So I'm going to show a short sequence from one of these kinds of play. And this one is the... Let's see. Okay, this is the Swift Northeast family group. This family group is traveling as they usually do in winter, single file. And then in the back, usually it's the alphas out front, as I said, and then near the back of the line are the younger 1 or 2-year-olds. So here at the back of the line, there's some play starting right here. And these two are saying, oh, I might want to get in on that. And so they do, and here's 3, 4 playing, and then a 5th wolf who was ahead of them in line crouches down and decides he's going to play a game of ambush. But as you can see in the next slide, it doesn't work out for him because this wolf at the last minute dodges around him, so you can see the tracks in the snow. And then there's play here, and pretty soon they're all playing, and then they head back single file traveling as if nothing happened. I want to read just another short excerpt from one of Troy Dunn's stories. He had so many. But this has to do with how wolves take care of each other, and this was the Swift Northeast wolves again. He said, the Swift Northeast wolves lived out on the flats of the Kantishna Hills. Gordon said it was a terrible place to raise pups because it's dry and there's not much prey. We watched their den site and saw they had 4 pups, but only 1 survived into the fall. But it wasn't a whole lot bigger in fall than it had been in May. Gordon said, that pup isn't going to survive the winter. We tracked them all winter long, and it was still there, still small, but there. The family, about 6 wolves, would travel through snow up to their chests, and they'd always go real slow and have that little pup sandwiched in between them. That pup did survive into the spring, and finally got big enough we couldn't differentiate between them. It was such a testament to how well they take care of each other. There's another whole chapter in the book on why wolves howl. This is a Toklat male who is call howling to 3 younger members of the family group who got separated from them when they were hunting in winter. It took about an hour, but he finally did locate them. Gordon, I'm just going to read just a short thing about why wolves howl and what he had to say about it. But he's got a lot of great stories in here about some of the call howling they do when hunters come back from hunting all night long. A couple miles away from the den, you start hearing them call howl to each other. He wrote, "What lingers with me most vividly from my experiences observing wolves in Denali is the singing of the wolves. For more than a quarter century, I've listened to wolves howl across these mountains, valleys, and tundra expanses, summer and winter, under almost every condition imaginable, and yet each time I hear another of their wilderness serenades, it thrills and delights me just as much as it did the first time. To me, a chorus of wolf howls is one of the most beautiful sounds in nature. Wolves howl for many reasons: to communicate with other group members, as a form of socializing that helps to maintain important bonds, to express a range of emotions, and to advertise their territorial boundaries. Given all we now know about them, there certainly isn't any longer a rational basis for humans to feel shivers of fear when wolves howl, contrary to one of the most persistent of all the many nonsensical characterizations and myths about wolves." And of course, he did observe wolves hunting very often. And this is from a series in the book where the Toklats, seen here, are chasing a herd of caribou here, while another herd of caribou watches back here. In this case, the wolves were not successful, but it did demonstrate one of the aspects of their caribou hunting, and that is that the wolves were able to anticipate which way the caribou were going to turn and then try to cut them off. The Toklats also, in their 1,000 square mile territory, had many doll sheep in the territory. And he said that the Toklats knew all the sheep mountains in their entire territory, and that he'd actually observed them locating white sheep against a snowy hillside from up to 8 miles away. So here's the Toklats, and they're headed out to this little band of sheep out here. In that case, the sheep got away again. Moose are important prey for the wolves, of course. And this is the end of a sequence in the book that shows some wolves trying to get one of these calves from this cow moose. They're not successful here in this last photo. She keeps the calves with her. And in this last photo, she's got them in the river where the wolves can't get to them. Let me just back up and read a short piece about some of that sheep hunting, because one of the things that he writes about in this book is the incredible capabilities of wolves, not just their eyesight, but their speed and their agility. Just learning to negotiate the high, icy knife ridges, peaks, and slopes usually required extensive guidance from experienced adults. Alongside these skills, Tokai wolves displayed impressive physical prowess, regularly climbing up and down the steep mountains like they weren't even there. I typically recorded instances of them ascending a 60-degree, snow-covered slope with an elevation change of 1,800 feet in less than 20 minutes, with no rest stops, and then breaking into intense play at the top. Several times, pilots and I watched in disbelief as Tokai wolves literally skied, stiff-legged, straight down icy chutes, adjusting their upraised tails back and forth for balance. We watched 3 Tokai wolves do this while trying to intercept sheep that were fleeing below from several other Tokai wolves chasing from another direction. The 3 bounded over the top of a high, narrow, rocky ridge at a full run and jumped immediately, apparently without looking first, into the top of an icy chute and skied straight down the 70-degree, 3,000-foot run. They zipped down this chute faster than any Olympic downhill ski racer I've watched. At the bottom, they switched immediately to a full run, although in this case, the sheep escaped to safety on a nearby ridge. So one of the things that Dr. Haber tried to do is look at some of the ideas and concepts that we have about wolves, some of these myths, and try to show us that they are just myths. One of the myths that he looked at is whether or not this myth that wolves simply kill everything that comes across in their path As I've already showed you, they're not always successful. But also, his research showed that in terms of when wolves encounter moose in winter, over the course of a winter, only about 5% of the time that wolves see moose in winter do they even attempt to chase them. Sometimes they even ignore prey, often at den sites in summer. This is a Tokai female nursing some pups. He has several stories in here of wolves ignoring prey. They come within feet of the sleeping wolves at the den site. Once a moose almost stepped on an adult sleeping wolf. There's also a myth that wolves don't eat everything, that they'll kill animals and then not eat all of it. He also said that this was indeed just a myth, that they tend to eat everything and they eat it fast. There's a sequence in the book that shows the wolves taking down a 1,200-pound moose and entirely consuming it down to the bones in 45 minutes. This is the remains of a 200-pound doll sheep ram. He watched the Savage River family group take down this ram, and it took them 12 minutes to reduce it to this. Just a few tufts of fur, and they ate most of the bones, as you can see. He also found that scavenging is a very important part of a wolf's winter diet. This is the Savage River family group, which were mostly black wolves here, with about 30 ravens around. The Savage River family group has uncovered a carcass, probably a moose from the size of it, and the ravens are helping themselves to some tidbits. His research showed that at least half, and sometimes up to 85% of a wolf's winter diet is scavenged food. Now, you know, scavenged food is moose or caribou or other animals that have died from other causes, and they just come upon their carcasses. He observed them digging sometimes up to 10 feet in hard-packed snow to get at these carcasses. Again, a testament to some incredibly keen sense of smell. This is the Savage River wolves with a grizzly bear. He took this photo in 1973. He said that wolves will also try to steal food from bears, and vice versa. Bears will try to steal from them. And he wrote that between bears and wolves, there's an age-old rivalry that I'm convinced includes some genuine dislike for each other. Now, I said earlier that he observed that family groups, if left unexploited, could develop traditions in terms of hunting. And the Savage River family group had a certain technique for hunting moose that he only ever saw that family group use. And the Savage River family group disappeared entirely in the winter of 1982-83, most likely from some illegal aerial hunting. And so this kind of storm and circle moose hunting he never saw again after that family group disappeared, even though several other family groups of wolves occupied that same territory in the later years. So this is the storm part of storm and circle. They find a moose, they come racing towards it, making all kinds of a ruckus. And then when they get to the moose, they circle it. And here they're testing the moose, see if there's any vulnerability, if it's old or sick or in any way incapable of defending itself. Sometimes it wasn't, and in which case they would decide not to try to attack, and they'd simply walk away. This was for their benefit, of course, because one swift kick from a moose could easily kill a wolf. This is a Tokai alpha female with 3 pups along the park road. This was taken in 1990 in Denali National Park, and here's a busload of lucky visitors getting to observe the wolves. Outside of Yellowstone National Park, Denali National Park is worldwide the easiest place to see wolves in the wild. However, right now, the wolves in Denali National Park and Preserve, the 6 million acres, is at the lowest number ever recorded. They were, 6 years ago, there were 147 wolves, according to the Park Service survey. Right now, the last count was 50 wolves. Now, I asked Tom Meyer about this, and he said that he couldn't see any environmental explanation for this drop in the wolf population, that it didn't seem to be the prey populations, it didn't seem to be any other environmental issues. However, what Dr. Haber had concluded is that
this kind of decline was at least in part due to trapping and hunting along the boundary of Denali National Park. This is the northeast corner of the park. Here's McKinley Village, the park entrance, Healy. Here's the park road. The yellow dots are Park Service, and the blue dots are Dr. Haber's recordings of the location of radio-collared wolves. You can see that the wolves are very intensely in this area, but they do stray outside of park boundaries. This little area right here is the Stampede Trail of Wolf Township. It's not part of the park. It's state land. There are also lots of homes and people living out there. So the wolves, this is sort of part of their territory. And the caribou migrate that way in winter, and so the wolves follow them, especially in winter. The crosshatch part here. The Board of Game did, after many years of people asking them to do this, they did institute a buffer in this crosshatched area, no wolf take buffer. So wolves were not allowed to be trapped or hunted in that area. However, in February of 2010, just a few months after Dr. Haber died, several groups put forward, I think there were 5 different proposals to the Board of Game to expand that buffer because it didn't really include the whole area. This blue line here is what Dr. Haber thought should be the buffer area. And I should note that as early as 1972, Dr. Haber was saying we need a buffer in that area of the park to protect the wolves, in that area outside the park to protect the wolves. So he knew this was an issue for a long time. So anyhow, that's what he had proposed, and so a group of citizens proposed that to the Board of Game. Other groups had several different proposals. This yellow line is what the National Park Service asked the Board of Game to do for a buffer. Instead, what the Board of Game did is they denied all of these, and they got rid of this too. And they put a moratorium on anyone asking them for a buffer for either 6 or 8 years. It's unclear. Anyhow, that happened in 2010. And after that, we saw a dramatic decrease in the number of visitors that saw wolves. And this comes from Denali National Park data. In 2010, 44%, or nearly half of the visitors that came to Denali National Park, got to see wolves. In 2013, last summer, only 4% got to see wolves. This is a male, alpha male, Tokai alpha male howling for his dead mate after returning to the place where she was trapped. I'm going to briefly go through some of the Tokai family losses because it really demonstrates this idea that it's not how many wolves you kill, but which wolves you kill. The Tokai family was a healthy group in '98. Gordon Haber said that the alpha pair was the closest bond that he had ever observed. But in 2001, the alpha male of that group died after a government darting study in March. And so this darting study that killed him happened after the mating of the alpha pair, but before pupping. So she was left pregnant with that year's litter. Fortunately, 2 males appeared and were adopted into the family group. And that's an interesting story because they were actually removed from the 40-mile area by Fish and Game to another area, and they were kind of making their way back there, and they happened upon this family group that had just lost the alpha male. And so they were adopted into the group, and they helped to raise the dead male's pups. But the alpha female never bonded with either of them, and so she ended up leaving the family group after that, and she ended up dying alone of starvation. Then her daughter and one of the new males became the new alpha pair. But in 2005, that new alpha female was snared in that Stampede Trail area. She struggled for a couple of weeks in the snare. During that time, the family group stayed with her, and this is because Gordon Haber was there in his plane, and he was observing this all along. And the male continued to travel back and forth to the site where she was killed, even after she was taken away. He traveled back and forth for up to over 2 months. And this is a photo of him doing just that. But during that time, several more members of the family group were caught in that snare set, and the family group itself began to fragment and fall apart. Finally, I think it was in April, he was shot by a hunter in that same area. At that point, all that was left of the Tokai family group were 6 1- and 2-year-olds. And as you can recall, 1- and 2-year-olds are not full adults. They don't have the experience. So what he saw happen to the Tokai family group is that their territory dramatically shrunk. They stopped sheep hunting entirely. They didn't know scavenging techniques very well, so they weren't able to scavenge well in winter. The only thing that seemed to save those Tokais from complete extinction was that the snowshoe hare population just happened to be at a peak. And so they subsisted almost entirely on snowshoe hares. This is a photo of Dr. Haber with a dead wolf. In 1993, the state started predator control again, and they were using the saturation snaring method. So Dr. Haber was interviewed for an article in People magazine, and he said, saturation snaring is the equivalent of high seas drift nets because it's indiscriminate. It catches not just wolves, but other animals, including caribou. These are wolves crossing ice in winter. One of the things he observed in cooperative rearing of pups is that sometimes when there was a large litter of pups, one of the other females would actually come into lactation and help nurse those pups. And during this period of time, this female here, this 2-year-old, had done that, had helped to nurse those pups that previous summer. And this black male, these two were killed by snares just a few weeks after, or by trapping just a few weeks after this photo. Gordon Haber was in the news a couple times, memorably, in 1994 when he made a video of a state-snared wolf. This video was shared worldwide and initiated a tourism boycott, which contributed to the cessation of at least that round of predator control. When I went through Gordon Haber's stuff, I'd seen the video, but when I went through all of his materials, I found a yellow legal pad with handwritten notes that described that event. When he went to the site with a Daily News photographer and reporter and saw these state-snared wolves, and they observed the wolves until Fish and Game biologists came and shot the wolves. I'm not going to read it to you now, but I'm just going to say that it's really surprising in terms of how the wolves behaved during that time period. Another time that Dr. Haber was in the news was in 1997 when he released a wolf from a snare set. I'm going to read a little piece from Johnny Johnson, who's a wildlife photographer and who first met Gordon Haber in 1968 when they were both seasonal park rangers. So what happened in this situation was that Dr. Haber found this wolf in a snare set that was, according to what he knew, was illegally baited. And so he thought that he was working with Fish and Game's cooperation or with an agreement with Fish and Game to release that wolf. However, Fish and Game later said no, we didn't have their permission. And so the state investigated both Gordon Haber for whether or not he illegally removed this wolf from the snare, and it investigated the trapper as to whether or not it was a legal snare set. And the state didn't file charges against either of them. However, the trapper sued Gordon Haber and won. It nearly bankrupted him, except that it was about, I think, a $180,000 fine. And fortunately, the organization that was funding some of his research at the time agreed to pay it, so he didn't end up going bankrupt. But let me just read Johnny Johnson's memory of this particular event. One thing that touched me the most, and touched Gordon a lot too, was that snared wolf. Gordon found a radio-colored wolf caught in a snare by the foot. It was baited in a way that Gordon knew wasn't legal. So they landed the plane, and Gordon went up to that wolf and decided to cut it loose. The wolf just lay there and looked at him as Gordon tried to get that snare off with his Swiss Army knife. It took him 30 minutes, and all that time the wolf was just looking at him, its face 10 inches from Gordon's face. What touched him and me was how intelligent that wolf was. It never tried to bite him, attack him, or even snarl at him while he was working that snare off with just a Swiss Army knife. It wasn't aggressive at all. That's a real sign of intelligence in an animal. When the Tokai family group lost so many members and their territory shrunk, another family group that was an offshoot of the Toklats, the Grand Prix family group, began to occupy much of their territory. And so visitors who used to see the Toklats started seeing these Grand Prix wolves along the park road, and they became the wolves that most visitors saw. This is a photo of the Grand Prix wolves in winter traveling a ridgeline. Along the boundary of the national park, that map that I showed you earlier, their trapping is allowed, and saturation snare sets are laid just right up to the park boundary. And in April 2012, again, after mating but before pupping, the alpha female of the Grand Prix pack was trapped in what had been the buffer zone. And the Grand Prix family group, which had been 15 wolves, dropped that summer to only 3 wolves. And viewing of park wolves dropped by over 95%. This again demonstrates what happens when you take a vital member of the family group. This is a pair of pups taken in 1968. In terms of predator control, Gordon did write quite a bit about that. And there was one instance I want to read a short section from. Some of you may remember this. They started predator control on the Alaska Peninsula. And in spring 2008, a couple of fish and game biologists went out there in helicopters and shot and killed the adults that they could find. And then they landed the helicopters and went to each of the 2 den sites and pulled the pups out and shot each of them. Now, the pups had never been out of the den. This happened in early summer before they had emerged from the den. This is what Dr. Haber wrote about that. What leaves me shaking my head the most about all these predator control programs is the missing sense of wonder. Listening to biologists involved in control programs, I'm always struck by how blandly and matter-of-factly they talk about killing wolves. They seem to think being objective and ignoring things like behavior and sentience is the mark of a good wildlife scientist. How sad and revolting that professionals entrusted with the management of these fascinating, important creatures view them in such shallow ways. I spend long hours observing wolves in the wild year-round, during the summertime mostly sitting quietly with a spotting scope near their dens. The behavior I see is truly enthralling. Quite likely, while I was observing some of it at a den in Denali National Park, Alaska Fish and Game biologists swooped down in a helicopter and suddenly turned similarly enthralling scenes at a wolf den on the Alaska Peninsula into a horror show culminating with a bullet through the head of each pup. We are the ultimate losers from all this wolf killing. I am convinced, for the way it diminishes the ability of our surroundings to evoke the sense of wonder that helps us not just to live, but to be alive. Dr. Haber said there's no shortage of information about the biology of exploited wolves, but there's pitifully little about the biology of unexploited wolves, and that's what he attempted to do in Denali National Park. This is a photo of a wolf thinking about stealing this scrap here from a grizzly bear and a couple ravens feasting on tidbits nearby. Dr. Haber said he wished he had been alive 100 years ago so he could see the exquisite adaptations that wolf family groups would have developed over many more generations of unexploited time together. And he said, as he just wrote, he points out that it's really our loss that we cannot experience that. So there are no unexploited wolf groups, not even in Alaska. And there are a couple of ideas that Dr. Haber had to help us out here. One is that Denali National Park needs a complete and permanent buffer. The other is that predator control needs to be looked at again, that intensive management technique. And he also pointed to a form of hidden predator control, what he called hidden predator control, and that is the liberal bag limits and hunting seasons all across Alaska. Throughout Alaska, at least 1,700 wolves are killed each and every year, and that doesn't include, for example, the pups that might have been left behind by wolves that were killed. He also said that we need a new system of wildlife management that values the intrinsic characteristics of wildlife, so that wolves aren't managed just by the numbers, but by that intrinsic characteristic of the family group. This is from a sequence in the book showing some wolves that were just sleeping on a fall day, and a grizzly with two or 3-year-olds comes upon these sleeping wolves, and this wolf is trying to playfully lead them away. In terms of that dislike for each other, the photos show that mama bear is literally foaming at the mouth. So Dr. Haber's belief, and mine too, is that wolves deserve our respect and admiration, not our fear and contempt. And he implored us to see that by allowing intact family groups of wild wolves to exist, we would be helping ourselves to lead richer lives. This is a photo that he took in 1971 of the Savage River family group traveling in winter. And this appeared in the first of many op-eds that he wrote for the New York Times about the social lives of wolves. And so I think about how this photo was seen by people all over the world since it was in the New York Times, and how one person can make a difference. And one of the reasons that I wrote this book, as I was telling a young man earlier, is that I hope to inspire the next generation of people that will do the kind of research, dedicated research that Dr. Gordon Haber did. I'm going to end with one of his tweets. This was from June 17, 2009. Which I think shows that sense of wonder that he never lost. Raw, wild beauty at the den tonight, with the wolves howling a great chorus for me as rolling thunder from a passing storm shakes the valley. Thanks very much. We'll take a couple minutes break, and then I can field a few questions or comments. Thanks.
Over 3 minutes. 8:03.
How'd the sound do?
It got better as it went along. It was weird how that feedback started at first, but then by halfway through it was gone.
I thought I heard some feedback.
A little bit, yeah. At the beginning, yeah. I don't know. The only fix they ever gave me for that was to turn it off and turn it on again. Which is a fix for almost everything.
I know. Computers, right? You just turn them off and turn them on again.
That was fascinating, and I want to run out there and buy my book before everybody gets going, but I'll wait till later.
Okay. So we'll just wait a few minutes, give people time to...
Yeah.
Okay.
That way they use the bathroom. They'll come back in while you're speaking, but it'll be fine. That works for you now.
So are we doing this for all the summer speakers?
Well, I work Wednesday nights, but I come most to all events, actually.
Do you?
Yeah. I'm either
You have more
just
than just a
IT
series?
support. Well, they also host those. They had Helen Atkinson, who was a legacy member of the university. She was the first engineer to graduate from here, and so they did this very nice tribute to her. And we had a packed house. This whole room was filled. Our overflow room was filled. It was great, and very many people wanted copies of that interview. And then Political Junkie, that's this weekend or this Friday. That host for Taku Nation. So he's coming, and it's supposed to be more comedy than anything else, but
that'll be fun.
it'll be politics, of course, but focused on Alaska.
Oh, that'll be fun.
Yeah.
Wow.
It should be funny, I think.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to think what the other, just tons of lectures. A lot of it's community-based. So the Tuesday nights healthy living lectures, those are, the population is usually older than nice. Yeah. This is more of the variety show, and then Thursday nights is the free music in the gardens, botanical gardens.
Oh, that's nice. Good. Hi.
Here, so can I just give a
Sure.
comment?
Thanks. You want me to make it out to you?
No, to Dirk and Danielle.
Okay.
My son-in-law used to fly him when he was
Oh, what was his name?
Dirk Nickish,
Oh,
by
okay.
a year.
Great.
So,
Here, let me sign on this page here.
oh, thanks.
So who?
So just put to Dirk and Danielle.
D-I-R-K.
Right.
Danielle, D-A-N-I-E-L-L-E.
Correct.
Okay, you never know.
I know.
Okay, great. Well, that's really great that he used to fly him.
Well, there was a bad political climate, and his plane actually got sabotaged. Sandy's gasoline tank. The kids stopped flying them.
Yeah, Troy Dunn told us the stories like
Yeah.
that. He must have talked to him.
Oh, I'm sure that it's a small community.
Yeah, there's a section in here. Gives a little taste of that. Oh, well.
Well, thank you for doing
Sure,
this, though,
yeah.
because I'm right with him. Good. And I didn't realize he had died in a plane crash. Was he flying it?
No, it was a new pilot, and he had only flown with a couple times. So, as Dirk knows, it's pretty tricky flying. Yeah, it was a real,
he probably
it was
knows
a real
who
tragedy.
it was, right?
Yeah.
It wasn't a woman, was it?
No, I can't remember the guy's name now. Well, he'll like Troy Dunn's pieces in here.
Oh, I'm sure he will.
Now, thanks for telling me about that, because, Troy had told me that, but I didn't know for sure.
Yeah,
From the mother.
he said the engine pieces ought to be analyzed, and I said that somebody had put metal, actually, that's right, metal in his gasket.
No, he can't miss that.
Anyway, it was
Very understandable.
Yeah, I know.
It's too scary. And it's
If everyone could please take their seats, we'll begin the question and answer portion.
we'll tell him things,
Okay,
and I wish
just to
they were.
let you know, the books are for sale for $25 right in the atrium, and Marybeth will be available to sign them after the Q&A session.
Okay, so I'm open for questions or comments now.
Now, my other question is, I've lived in Alaska for so long, so vilified in Alaska. Did he get support from the scientific community, his papers and whatnot outside of Alaska, or in Alaska, that, scientific peer reviewed
Yeah.
and that type of support?
Okay, the first question is anybody doing something similar to what he did? And the answer is no. We don't have anybody we don't really know what's going on with the wolves in Denali or any of his study area anymore, except for the data collection that the Park Service does and Fish and Game with their surveys. So all we really know now is numbers. Now, there was just a paper that just came out in the last day or two. Bridget Board is one of the authors. I can't remember the other author's name. Does anyone? She works at UAF. She's a biologist. Laura Pruitt. Okay. They just had a paper come out that corroborates some of Dr. Haber's research. So they are doing some research, and their paper has to do with, again, that point of what happens when you take one of the alphas of the family group and how that affects the family group. So there is some being done, but nothing, not that intense kind of like on the ground with the wolves kind of research, unfortunately. And so I'm trying to inspire the next generation. In terms of his support outside of Alaska, Dr. Haber's research conclusions were novel during his lifetime. Since then, there's a researcher by the name of Christina Eisenberg whose work corroborates some of Dr. Haber's. But at the time, no, he didn't get much support from the scientific community either. It was a really tough road all the way for him. But he was very passionate, and he continued to go to conferences and write and respond and continued to try his best. Thanks for asking.
If we look at the circumpolar area, is anybody else doing anything like that?
Not that I know of, but then I don't know too much of what's going on in other parts of the world. I did just an interesting story. When this book came out, I got an email from a man in Finland who is a train engineer, but when he takes his vacation, he takes it in winter, and he follows a family group of wolves. He had learned about Dr. Haber's research when Dr. Haber had an article in the Smithsonian, I think in the 80s, and ever since then he had followed it. And so he has been sending me detailed accounts, and again, this is simply a volunteer, amateur naturalist, of his accounts of what's going on with wolves there, and similar kinds of situations where there's trapping and hunting, and it fragments the family groups, and if they're left alone, they develop these traditions. But that's, it's interesting to hear from someone like that from the other side of the world. But I don't know of any scientists that are doing the kind of research that Dr. Haber did. Another thing I've learned is that it's becoming more and more rare for researchers to do that kind of field work in general. I talked with Dr. Vic Van Ballenberg, who has studied moose in Alaska for decades, and Craig Matkin, who has studied killer whales, orcas, in Prince William Sound and other parts of Alaska for decades. And both of them said, it's just nowadays scientists are usually just doing data collection. They're using technology, they're radio collaring and doing things like that, and they're not spending as much field time actually observing the animals. So it's really kind of a lost art, which I'm hoping will come back, because there are things you can only know by actually observing them. The radio callers tell you where they are, but they don't tell you what they're doing. So thanks for the question.
I've been involved with opposing area wolf hunting and predator control for a long time. And Gordon, there was a period where in Fairbanks where we would turn out huge crowds at the people on our side at the hearings. But over time, it just became clear that the Board of Game is basically anti-wolf, and it didn't matter how many people. And I even talked to Gordon about this. We could have had 1,000 people there, and so it's really frustrating. Twice in the last 20 years, we put on the ballot. We got 50,000 signatures, and we had a statewide vote, and we banned aerial hunting. And twice the legislature turned right around and put it back. It was right down party lines. The Republicans did this, and it's the same thing with this Board of Game we have now. After 3 successive Republican administrations, the Board of Game is as anti-wolf as it's ever been, and that's just a fact. So when people are thinking about voting, if they care about the wolves, they may want to think about this.
Thank you. I know that a lot of people have tried for many, many years to make the Board of Game more like a Board of Wildlife, where at least some of the representatives on the board are not representing just hunting and trapping, but are also representing those that just want to view or photograph wildlife. And even that has been difficult to even get someone on there with that kind of background.
Ruggles, PhD, probably one of the most knowledgeable people in Alaska about wolves. Studied wolves all her life, was on the Board of Game. They kicked her off and put in a mechanic that had a high school education. So that's what we're doing.
Remember that, yeah. Yeah, it's a hard road. It is, thank you. All right, any other comments or questions?
The buffer area.
Oh, let me let him, go ahead.
You've reviewed his notes, I assume,
right.
pretty thoroughly. Did he in any place comment on the possible consequences of viewing wolf behavior from the air and the potential for disturbance of what they were engaged in?
Yeah, thanks. That's a good question. I talked to his pilot, Troy Dunn, about that. And Troy said that he outfitted the plane to be as quiet as possible, first of all. And they kept a certain distance from the wolves. And again, they had to have permission from the Park Service to fly. And so they had to observe the Park Service regulations that way. And this is what Troy told me, again. He said that the wolves didn't change behavior when it was their plane, but he saw them change behavior if another plane came by and flew close to them. So Troy thought, and Gordon Haber did not necessarily agree with this, so let me just clarify that the wolves had actually come to know the sound of that plane. So that's all I know about that. Thanks for the question.
Why did you choose to write the book?
Why did I choose to write it? It's a good question. I wasn't looking for it. I got to know Gordon Haber in his last 10 years of life. So I helped to plan his memorial service in Anchorage. And that's where I met his pilot, Troy Dunn, and Johnny Johnson, some of his friends, and Joel Bennett. And they were sitting around talking, and they said, what a shame. 43 years of research, and now it's just gone. Now there's nothing to show for it. And I started thinking about that. And one of the things I thought about over the 25 years is I wish Gordon Haber would write a book. I kept waiting for him to write a book. And so with those two thoughts in my head, I thought, well, maybe we could do something. So I contacted his family, and they said, sure, go for it. Do what you can. So I really did it because I felt that it needed to be done. Not necessarily because I wanted to do it, but because I felt like it needed to be done, that his work needed to be out there in an accessible format for anyone to pick up and read, and all together like that. So, thanks. Did you have another question?
On the buffer zone that the water exists, do you know approximately how many hunters are around or in that area?
Yeah, there are only 2 people that trap in that area now. And one of them, it's a weekend thing that he does. He actually has a job with the state. So it's really only 2 folks. So, part of the thing about it is that if you close trapping there, you're not affecting this whole community, it's just 2 guys. The hunting, the alpha male that was killed, he was killed by a sport hunter who came up from the lower 48 and was on a guided hunt. So some of that goes on there as well. Carolyn?
I appreciated the variety of this presentation and the use of the photos with the readings from Gordon and other people. And I'm wondering, have you given this presentation outside of Alaska much yet? And if you have, what kind of reactions do you get or questions?
I've only done it a couple times, and that was in Seattle and Olympia. And I was going there anyhow for a writing conference, and it's the Wolf Conservation Center in Olympia, who actually had at one time funded some of Gordon's early work in the early 1990s. They asked me to come speak, and so they organized it. And I'm going to also back to New York in the fall and give a talk there, again by a Wolf Conservation Center that's bringing me back there. But other than that, I haven't. I would like to. I'd like to go to to some universities and talk to students. That's what I'd really like to do. But I need some invitations, so.
I was thinking, I had recently read Bob Hayes' Wolves of Yukon, right, and the result of all of what he had done and others results in the wolf management plan for Yukon. Dumb question, I guess, but what are the prospects for here, or something like that?
For something like what?
A wolf management plan.
A wolf management plan?
Yeah.
I don't think the prospects are very, very good. I have read about the book, but I haven't read it. And I understand that he concluded that predator control doesn't work.
Well,
right?
it's unsustainable.
Right, yeah.
And he calls the result, or the effort, characterizes it as non-management for game farming. So I would choose to refer to the Alaska Department of Fish and Game Farming, because that's really what's going on here.
Mm-hmm.
And to my thinking, this is all very good, really good background, but unless there's a real outcry about Alaska's wildlife legacy by just many people, the Board of Game will always be relevant rather than irrelevant.
Yeah. It is. I agree with you, and that is an important book that Hayes wrote about how predator control really is not sustainable and not effective. Oh, and I'll take your question, but I just wanted to, before I forget, I have some sheets here that if you want to do something to try to help Alaska's wolves, we do have a couple of ideas. There's an idea for how to deal with the buffer issue, for an example, and there's an idea of how to shift this predator control issue. So I can give you one of those when I'm out there signing books, or I'll just leave a stack here if you want to pick one up. Let's see.
Well, first, talking about Bob Hayes in the Yukon, Bob did not conclude that wolf control wasn't effective, but just said it had to be chronic or perpetual, and that if wolves were temporarily reduced in numbers, it would result in an increase of prey in many situations, but not all. But then eventually you would have to control the wolves again. His personal conclusion was that wasn't worth it, that we should just let systems behave naturally. That has not been the management regime that's actually in practice in the Yukon. They're doing predator control over there too. And those are decisions that have a social or political basis, and but I don't think there's any argument on the basic science that, at least in many conditions, reducing predators can result in an increase of prey, at least over a short time period. But I'd also, as a former biologist, just like to point out that I think you and maybe Gordon himself, have a false idea of how unique his work was. Wolves have been heavily studied throughout North America and to a lesser extent in Scandinavia, where they don't have as many wolves right now, but there have been extensive studies in Russia. The Isle Royal studies have been going on longer than the studies in Denali Park. And as a general rule, as a scientist, Gordon didn't have a lot of credibility among other scientists, partly because he didn't publish, but also because many of the results that he reported were just diametrically different from what virtually every other science wolf study was finding. And one of the problems with observational work, in later years, most of Gordon's work was actually done from the airplane. There are certain things you can see from an airplane, many things you can't. Talking to friends in Park Service, looking at some of the reports Gordon did, he misidentified as to age and sex some of the collared wolves. They knew precisely whether they were yearlings, 2-year-olds, males and females, because they had actually physically handled them. And also many of Gordon's conclusions as to the long-term nature of wolf packs or family groups, that they tend to be all closely related and breed incestuously, when we use that term, are not borne out by DNA studies from blood samples and tissue samples actually collected from wolves.
Okay. Can you wrap it up so I can comment on your comment?
Okay, I think that's
Thank you.
But yeah. I'm just trying to point out that there is...
Okay, so I hear that you have a lot of disagreements, so thanks. Gordon did publish, and if you take a look at the book, you can see some of his publications, including Conservation Biology, which I hear is a pretty good peer-reviewed magazine. So I wouldn't say that he didn't publish. Let me talk now, please. Thank you. And in terms of the uniqueness of his research, I don't know of any other research that extensive in Alaska. And as I refer to another question, I don't know about the research in the rest of the world. So thank you for pointing that out. I really appreciate it. Now, in terms of the disagreements in the scientific community, yes, there were lots of disagreements in the scientific community. However, some of those disagreements, as I pointed out in this research paper that's just coming out, are starting to corroborate Dr. Haber's research, as well as some of the research that's been going on in the lower 48. And so I think some of those so-called disagreements were really, let's see, what's the Voltaire quote? Those who walk the well-trodden path throw stones at those who show the new road. Sometimes when someone's showing us something that's new and different, we tend to try to poke holes in it. So I understand that you have a lot of expertise and a lot of comments and a lot of disagreements, and I appreciate that. But I would disagree, and I would say that Dr. Haber's research is very important and very groundbreaking. Okay, time to wrap it up. One more question or no? One more. Okay.
Gordon and I were friends, good friends for a while. Not that I just met in the 60s, through the 70s. I am nominating for an award for the Alaska Wildlife Federation that eventually changed polarities and became the Council. So you go back on there's a question. And I agree with the social structure of wolves, and Gordon and I sat around Kevin and we didn't agree, and several said that I'm inaccurate. I also do not agree in biology.
He's also disagreeing with some of the things that I don't know.
I agree with some of the social structure I do. The deal about airplanes, when I talk about. Have you been this one?
Yes, I have.
Okay. That's a good one. But the question is, you never spoke about beta males in the packs at all. And this is a big point, of course.
Mm-hmm.
And could you tell us in that pack right there where the beta male would be?
No, I can't, because I didn't take the photograph, and I only know what Gordon wrote about the photograph. But in the book,
from his work, about the beta male.
Yeah, in the book there is quite a lot about the beta male. You're right. That was really important, especially with the Savage River family group.
Hugely important. And
Yes.
I forgot to tell you, I have a cabin in there since the 60s, and I trapped 3 packs. One of them, of course, wasn't in, but I trapped the Savage and I trapped the Tokai group. So we were on different sides of some fences, but very much in agreement on others. But that beta male thing, and I believe in social structure, I said that beta thing, beta male and alpha male thing is hugely important for what you're trying to.
Yeah, thank you. And like I said, it's in the book. I'm not able to, share all the information with you that's in the book tonight in an hour. But yes, especially with the Savage River family group, there's quite a lot of information about how the beta male helps the alpha pair in all aspects, hunting as well as pup rearing and so on. Thank you.
And you said one thing to follow up on that. You said that the hunting and trapping frequently mortality to the alpha male.
I said that hunting and trapping often takes the more experienced wolves, which are often the alphas, yes.
Right.
Because they're often the ones leading. And the beta is often leading too. I know what you're saying. It's okay. But the beta is also an older, more experienced wolf as well. It's not the 1 and 2 year olds.
Gordon and I are very much on the same side of that argument. The alpha male isn't the one in front of the
You know what? Why don't you read the book, and then if you have continued, well, it's Gordon's writing, and so if you still have disagreements with what he wrote, then let me know. Okay? Thanks. Okay.
That concludes the question and answer portion. Marybeth is going to be outside signing books. If anyone would like to stick around for that, everything will be out in the atrium. And thank you very much for coming out tonight. And thank you, Marybeth.
Okay. Do you want to just set up? Yeah. In fact, I can bring everything for you.
Okay.
I'm doing accent.
I know. I don't have it anymore, but I love hearing them. Are you where? Oh yeah. Okay. Yeah. I know. No one believes me.
Sign up.
They don't believe me when I'm half Italian either. I speak Italian. I know. You just never know. Just some ideas. You know, this is just take that with you, and there's some ideas and letters that you can write things.
I don't like
I better get out here and sign books, but right, you know, I
cut it out because I was just wrong. No. It's she wrote this. So
I will
step in.
Yeah, we didn't know
You didn't know that. And then the people in front of you were just twiddling their thumbs where the four people were making Google eyes to express their displeasure. But as she was saying, it's definitely some hostility. I hope they similar big.
I agree. I'm going to pass on.
Okay, well, thank you.
I'm not sure how.
When they go on for more than a minute, you stand up and say, "What is your question?" Simple as that.
Thank you for telling me that.
Thank you. Yeah.
Hopefully there won't be any hostile crowds.
Yeah, you never thought they would.
Usually, it's a free event. People come and have a good time.
Yeah, but it's a very charged subject. Yeah.
I see now. I see.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you.